Tentacles of Doom. When people think of the largest living creatures that inhabit the earth, many animals come to mind. Whales, elephants, giraffes, or a host of other gargantuan beasts that can be found throughout the world. Few people, however, are aware that not only does one of the largest living organisms live in the wilderness of Michigan, but this creature lives unseen and unheard, beneath the ground, waiting for unsuspecting prey. And few people are aware of how deadly this creature can be. It is not an animal with 4 legs. It is not a creature that dwells in a river or the Great Lakes. It is a fungus, a single massive organism living in the ground that is rumored to be the size of a football field, interconnected as one large mass, unseen and unknown, until several years ago. Scientists not only discovered this enormous fungus, but they quickly found out what a terrible threat it poses to those who choose to venture into the woods. This fungus, or creature if you will, wasn't discovered until a few short years ago, and it was discovered in a horrifying way by a group of innocent but very unfortunate campers. A group of 5 friends headed to Marquette, Michigan for a weekend vacation. They were staying at a campground in tents. The weather that weekend was cold and raining, and it was for this reason there weren't many other vacationers at the campground. Most tourists had opted to stay in hotels or motels out of the weather where they could be warm and dry. After going to bed on Friday night, the campers awakened to a mysterious sound. It was still raining and the drizzle thrummed on the canvas tent, but the campers had not been awakened by the weather. Their sleep had been interrupted by a different sound altogether. A strange slurping sound, like something large slithering through the wet leaves and grass. Opening the tent flap and turning on the flashlight, the campers were horrified to see a strange, snake-like creature emerging from the ground not far from the smoldering fire. It was brown and long, worm-like, and had no eyes. Terrified, yet curiously fascinated, the campers continued to watch as yet another one of these strange tentacles emerged from the ground, rising into the air above them. Another appeared, then another, followed by still one more. Before they realized what was happening, it was too late. Beneath one of the tents, one of these mysterious tentacles quickly tore through the nylon floor. Frightened and uncertain what to do, the 5 campers tried to flee, but they had waited too long. All were quickly seized by the tentacles, which were incredibly strong and very fast. The campers struggled and fought back, but it was no use. The tentacles began pulling the helpless campers into the soggy ground, and because there were no other campers nearby, their pitiful pleas for help, their screams of agony and terror, went unheard. At the last moment, one of the campers was able to wiggle free and escape. He ran for help, arriving at the main roadway nearly a half hour later, where he flagged down a motorist who drove him to the police station. There, he reported what had happened, and also stated that during his escape while he was running toward the highway, he had encountered numerous more of these strange tentacles, many of which tried to capture him. An investigation began. When investigators arrived at the campsite, the only indication that anything was wrong was the massive amount of disturbed earth, piles of dirt and rock. Police began digging, but they found nothing. 4 people had vanished, and there was only one witness with a story so incredible that no one would believe him. Until later that year, when the monstrous underground beast struck again. It was the July 4th weekend. The weather was sunny and bright across the entire state of Michigan. The Harrison family had a tradition every year. They traveled from their rural home outside of Pontiac to one of their favorite destinations, 12 Mile Beach, a beautiful scenic campground at Pictured Rocks National Park in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There, they would spend the holiday weekend exploring the park and swimming in the cool, crisp waters of Lake Superior. The weather was perfect, and the Harrison family celebrated July 4th with an afternoon barbecue. In the evening, after toasting marshmallows and making s'mores, the Harrison family went to bed. The children, 11-year-old Elizabeth and 9-year-old Scott, slept in sleeping bags in a small pup tent, while their parents slept in a larger tent just a few feet away. It had been a long, fun-filled day, and the 4 fell asleep easily. None of them could have possibly imagined the horror they would experience in the very early hours of the next day. A horror that was waiting for them beneath the ground while they slept. Elizabeth Harrison was the first to notice something wrong. It was early. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, and sunlight would soon be filtering through the trees. The forest was gloomy and quiet, except for the chatter of early morning birds and the chirping of crickets. And then, another sound. Something beneath the children's small pup tent. It sounded like the snapping of a branch, faint and nearly inaudible, but Elizabeth was a light sleeper, and her slumber was often easily disturbed by such soft sounds. Her eyes flickered open, and she stared up into the gloomy darkness within the tent. The sound came again, startling Elizabeth. It was a scraping, swishing sound, much closer now, only a few inches from her sleeping bag. Something was moving beneath the nylon floor of the tent. Slowly, Elizabeth reached out of her sleeping bag and felt around in the darkness. Her hand met something that moved beneath the tent, something that wiggled. Thinking it was a snake, she screamed and tore out of her sleeping bag, leaping through the tent flap and sprawling onto the hard-packed earth. Several feet away, orange embers glowed, the remains of what had been the previous night's campfire. But it was what was around the fire pit that was most disturbing. All around the murky, dark campsite, shadowy tentacles were emerging from the ground, squirming and writhing like giant worms, like the live roots of a tree, reaching up and out, weaving back and forth, nearly a dozen feet into the air. Some were rising into the air and wavering back and forth like the heads of deadly cobras. Elizabeth wanted to scream again, but she was frozen, completely gripped in the vice of sheer terror. On her hands and knees, she could only stare at the shadows of these strange things that were all around her. Her first scream had awoke her parents, and they too had tumbled out of the tent, only to stop and stare, mystified and horrified, at the bizarre sight unfolding around them. Scott had been alerted by his sister's scream, and he crawled out of the tent and gasped, terrified by the sweeping tentacles emerging from the ground and reaching for the gray morning sky. Elizabeth struggled to her feet. Grabbing her brother's hand, the two children stumbled around, waving tentacles in an effort to reach their parents only a few feet away. The tentacles, however, were much quicker. They seized the two children, wrapping around their bodies like boa constrictors, and they quickly pulled Elizabeth and Scott into the air. Seeing their children in such danger, Mr. Harrison sprang. In a frenzy, he began pounding at the tentacle with his fists, but his efforts were useless. Finally, he was able to grab Elizabeth's arms and pull her from the clutches of the savage, snake-like beast. While mother and daughter quickly hustled to their vehicle, Mr. Harrison grasped one of his son's legs and tried to wrestle him free from the barbaric, twisting tentacle. He was unsuccessful, as the tentacle seizing the young boy was far too strong. In a panic, Mr. Harrison picked up an axe and began striking the tentacle at its base, where it was emerging from the ground. If the tentacle felt any pain, it showed no signs of it. Fortunately, after several powerful swings with the axe, Mr. Harrison succeeded in chopping the tentacle in two. It released its grip on the boy, and he fell to the ground. More and more tentacles were emerging from the earth, sweeping about like giant, crazed worms, lunging for the man and boy. Mr. Harrison grabbed his son by the arm, and the two raced around and over the wiggling tentacles and finally made it to the vehicle. Several tentacles lashed at the car, wrapping around the tires and axles, but Mr. Harrison pressed the accelerator and broke free of their hold. The vehicle sped along the bumpy trail road as the Harrison family fled their camp, leaving their gear and belongings behind. Later, when Mr. Harrison returned to the campsite with police, they found the entire area in disarray. The ground had been disrupted where the tentacles had emerged from the earth, leaving several gaping holes. The two tents and most of the family's camping gear had been completely destroyed. The severed tentacle was found near the pit, and it was immediately taken to a state police laboratory for an investigation. It was discovered that the organism was some sort of mysterious fungus, not unlike mushrooms found on the forest floor. At the campsite, an excavation began. Teams of scientists, laboratory technicians, and local authorities dug deep into the earth with shovels and backhoes. However, they found no signs of the mysterious fungus. Still, the evidence they had was enough to shed light on this strange organism that lives underground. Scientists believe that the enormous living thing resides deep in the earth and uses its powerful long tentacles that come to the surface to feed. To this day, no one knows where or when it will appear next, and those who venture into the woods to camp are advised to be on the lookout for strange sounds and sights that might indicate another emergence of this horrifying, bloodthirsty fungus.